from someone that's done it and from someone that consistently works with entrepreneurs, do you think it's more motivation led or more just consistency and passion and improving day after day?
If you are waiting for motivation, then you may not achieve what you want to achieve because it will not always be there. Every single morning you wake up, you may not be motivated, but you have to have something that is pulling you that's bigger than that. And so I personally totally agree that passion, and for me, that's your why. But your why has to be beyond money. It has to be something that you're like, this pisses me off that people set out to build 7-figure, 8-figure businesses and end up trapped in the very businesses designed to create their freedom. And for me, that pisses me off. So I wake up every day and go try to help people who are building businesses not get trapped in the very thing. So every leader has to find that thing that pisses them off, because then that'll be the thing that drives them to continue to solve it.
Staci Gray is the founder of Organize to Scale. She has over 2 decades of experience organizing real-world businesses to scale and puts an emphasis on quickly collapsing the gap between ideas and profits by persistently executing for progress and results. She envisions a world where innovative leaders are no longer trapped by operational chaos and instead are empowered to efficiently and effectively solve real-world problems, impact real people on a human level, and generate profits quickly. In our discussion, we discussed motivation versus consistency and passion as an entrepreneur, how to not get trapped in your business, and how to mentally level yourself when emotions are running high. Enjoy our conversation. Staci, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And here's where I want to start. So you're an entrepreneur, you're a business advisor, and you've actually built several multi-million-dollar companies. Curious to hear, what was the first?
Well, the first one I built as an integrator, and you might even know of it. It's called the Real Estate Guys Radio Show. It's one of the top real estate podcasts and had been for a while. And I graduated high school at 16, and my father was the co-host of the Real Estate Guys and asked if I would come help them build it. And that was my first experience organizing and scaling a business. And I did it from about 16 to 22.
So when you think about building a podcast, obviously congratulations on graduating high school at 16. I think that's an awesome achievement. But kind of coming in, like wet behind the ears, first kind of business experience, what challenges did you see that like a podcast would have, and how did you go about solving those issues?
Solving podcast issues?
Yeah, because growing a podcast is hard. I mean, I can attest from my point of view. So curious to hear from your experience.
This is an interesting question. So most of our success was offline before it was online. So we had learned really well to build relationships. And essentially that's what you're doing with a podcast, is you're building relationships with other thought leaders. And other thought leaders like to enjoy in-depth conversations about things that they're curious about that are thought-provoking. And that was one of the angles that we did and did really well.
Got it. So really focused on building relationships and trying to target the proper guests and having things be more conversation based.
Yeah.
So I know that podcast thankfully was able to scale and be really successful. I'm just curious, how long did it take to get to $1 million in top line revenue for that?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember. I have to go back and look.
All
But
good.
I can tell you with some of the other companies, it took about 24 months.
Interesting. So when a company goes from, say, call it a couple $100,000 to $1 million in revenue, do you see it as more of a linear growth kind of pattern, or do you see it more as they're struggling a bit, and then they find something that works, and then they really turn that up?
I think a lot of leaders are different. So it's important to understand your natural wiring. There's some leaders that are a little bit more analytical and they want to dot their I's and cross their T's. And so making it linear and systematic is beneficial to that personality type, but it can also experience paralysis of analysis where they don't really move because they want all of it to be perfect. And then you have other folks that are more maverick leaders or entrepreneurs, and they fire and then aim and then clean up their mess as they go. And I don't think either one's right or wrong, but the people who go faster are the maverick ones.
Do you find with those maverick ones, do they tend to be more successful than the ones that are more analytical, or does it really just kind of depend on the situation?
Well, I'd have to ask you, how would you define success?
So it's a good question, and way to ask the host, or way to host the host. I think that's a catchphrase I came up with. I mean, I think success, how I would define it, and I like that you asked that question because I think success is can be a really arbitrary definition. I think it has the same broad meaning to people, but in terms of like being happy, financial freedom, but I think specifically that looks different to different people. But say, for example, if I had to define my definition of success, I would say scaling this to be the number podcast, which is kind of the path that I'm going along in the future, and being able to, do this full time for a living and be able to talk to people in person. Now that's my definition of success. So I could, now that you asked that, I could see how different people would have different versions of. Some people who are more analytical are like, I just want to build it up so I could still be in their day to day. And like other people could build it up. So they're like, I just want to sell it someday. So I guess to redirect the question, do you think it really more depends on what someone's definition of success is and then that more aligns with what they're looking for?
Well, I can tell you this. My definition of success is inner congruence. And in my experience, a leader has to be congruent on the inside in order to create the eyes open success that they want. And the leaders who are most congruent internally experience the most external success. So I don't know that if one personality profile is more wired for success over the other. I think speed, it plays a factor. So somebody who is more analytical is going to take longer. Somebody who's more maverick is going to go faster. But they also are going to both have a ton of messiness, things that plot twists and curveballs. You can't script everything. And the person that can just lean into that and have the grit and resilience and tenacity to continue to scale their organization and push through all of the hurdles that they're going to have is the person that's going to be successful.
So do you think it's less about more someone's natural characteristics and more so far as in their attitude of how they approach it, whether someone's analytical or more maverick based, as long as they're resilient and kind of keep going? Do you think that really determines how far they go?
I think doing the fundamentals day after day after day consistently.
Hmm.
And just like if you want to get in shape, the person who's maverick or analytical, it doesn't really matter if the person does the work. So
Hmm.
get up every day, in like a podcast, which is what we were talking about.
Yep.
Recruit guests, interview guests. You're going to suck at interviewing when you first start. You're going to suck at being a guest when you first start. And you're going to be embarrassed. And you're going to look back at your first ones doing it and wishing you would have done it differently. So the people who start and then continue and then don't over identify with the successes or failures is the person who's going to win.
Funny enough, I think my first guest was someone based in Texas. I have to double check, but an accountant based in Texas. And sometimes I look back at that interview and I don't want to say I sucked completely, but I was nowhere near kind of composed as I am now. And no way am I perfect. But what's interesting about that is, just watching it, seeing the stark difference between where I was there and where I am now. And it's not like I noticed a change episode to episode, but it's more of a long kind of thematic change over time. So
Mm-hmm.
really interesting on there. But on that note, actually, something that I've been hearing a lot about, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So a lot of people say, and a lot of entrepreneurs will say that they're very motivated, and motivation, motivation, motivation. An interesting theory that I've been reading about recently, and you kind of touched loosely upon this indirectly, is the fact that a lot of people say motivation is complete BS. Realistically, it's consistency and passion. So, from someone that's done it and from someone that consistently works with entrepreneurs, do you think it's more motivation led or more just consistency and passion and improving day after day?
If you are waiting for motivation, then you may not achieve what you want to achieve because it will not always be there. Every single morning you wake up, you may not be motivated, but you have to have something that is pulling you that's bigger than that. And so I personally totally agree that passion, and for me that's your why. But your why has to be beyond money. It has to be something that you're like, this pisses me off that people set out to build 7-figure, 8-figure businesses and end up trapped in the very businesses designed to create their freedom. And for me, that pisses me off. So I wake up every day and go try to help people who are building businesses not get trapped in the very thing. So every leader has to find that thing that pisses them off, because then that'll be the thing that drives them to continue to solve it.
I think it's a great that you know your why, and awesome to hear that you have that passion and do have that consistency. So interesting to see the theme that you're bringing on there. On a slightly different note, say if someone is struggling to find their why, what should step one be towards discovering their why?
Well, I think ask yourself pisses you off.
It's fair enough.
And
Okay.
then even further than that, I think you have to experiment.
Mhm.
I think you're a lot younger than I am.
I
And
appreciate it. We'll talk about that off air, but I appreciate it.
um, but when you're young, like I started young, I started at 16. So when you're young, you think you know what you want to do, you think you know what you like, you think you know what your passions are, you think you know what brings you joy. But 16 to 26, you're going to change. 26 to 36, you're going to change. You're going to continually evolve, and what you thought you knew about the world is going to evolve as well. And so finding something and that you can be passionate about, and for me, learning. I love learning. And so the essence of an entrepreneur is that you identify problems and you solve them. And in order to identify a problem and solve it, you have to learn something new. You have to learn a better way of doing it, a better way of solving it, a better way of communicating it or articulating it. And that is a growth journey. And so if you lean into the growth journey, eventually you're going to find the thing that really pisses you off and resonates with your soul that's beyond money. And when you find that thing through trial and error and experience, you can then latch onto it and build something long standing that's going to create the type of success you're looking for.
On the note regarding aging, do you think a lot of it has to do with the fact that obviously when we're young, we tend to be a little naive and think that we know everything. And, obviously we make a lot of mistakes when we're young. But do you think a part of that, thinking what we know we want to do, ends up being a factor of us just kind of being conditioned from the stuff we see around us versus as opposed to when we grow up, we start to formulate more independent thoughts and start to kind of say, part of my French, fuck it a little more regarding some of the stuff that we want to pursue?
I think that's very much true. I think we are definitely products of our programming and our environment. And then you reach crossroads. So I think everybody in their life comes to a point where they say enough is enough. I don't, this is this way I'm thinking, that what I'm doing is no longer working for me. And when you hit those moments, whether it's a health crisis, a relationship crisis, a financial crisis, some type of collision in your life where you have to have an inner reckoning, when you do that and you resolve to become who you know your identity to be and who you want to show up in the world as, and you reconcile that, and then you start changing your behavior to honor what your inner guidance system is telling you, then yes, transformation will take place. It doesn't mean the things that you were programmed or the environments you were in previously are right or bad or wrong or anything. There's no judgment or labeling around it. It's just it trains you to operate and create a results in your life in a certain way. And if you want to shift that, you have to look at those things.
That's an interesting point, and I appreciate the long thought out thought there.
Mhm.
So you're the founder of Organized to Scale, and I know you touched a bit upon your why earlier, but why specifically did you start Organized to Scale?
Well, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 2015, and I wasn't really planning on starting another company. But I started organizing to scale some of our family businesses, and it was really, really successful during a really challenging time in our lives. The revenue grew, profit margin grew, and we then had other folks coming to us saying, will you help me organize and scale my business too? And so I ended up organizing to scale 36 businesses in 36 months, and was the launch pad for Organize to Scale. And really my why for doing it was because my father was working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then when my mom got cancer, he really wanted more time freedom. And so it was really much in my face that we set out to build businesses, but then oftentimes we end up trapped or just create jobs for ourselves. And the only way out of that is to create systems and to empower people to run the systems on a day to day so you're not trapped in it. And we figured out models and frameworks to do that internally that then could be scalable to other people and really create freedom for leaders to be at home around dinner tables having meaningful conversations instead of working every evening.
Got it. Well, I'm sorry to hear that that's what happened with your family, and I love that you were trying to help out your dad, go from working 18 hours a day to having more meaningful time. On that note, that's an issue that a lot of entrepreneurs have where, they probably don't have the best habits. They're slightly emotionally obsessed. And while a healthy amount of emotional obsession, I know that sounds a little oxymoronic, is good, to be fully into it and just kind of disregarding every aspect of your life isn't great. So, from your experience working with entrepreneurs, what's the toughest part about getting them to jump from that 18 hours a day to more of a kind of high level strategic approach and kind of not be as emotionally involved as they are?
Well, I think emotion is important. I think entrepreneurship can be like professional athletes. So if you take the ego out of the athlete, then they don't perform as well. So I don't think anything wrong is wrong with emotion or ego. I think there's healthy blend between maybe our oneness theory and then our individual personality or ego theory. And so I don't think not being emotional is helpful in entrepreneurship. I think you need emotional emotions and emotional intelligence along that journey. I don't know if I answered your question, but I kind of got hung up on the emotional part because I feel like emotions are powerful passions.
For sure. I think no, it was a good you did a great job touching upon, emotion I definitely agree is important. But obviously it's one of those things, there's the good and the bad. So there's the emotion that gets you involved, really your why, but also the emotion that sometimes could cloud your judgment and make you more involved than really you should be. So what's the
Mm.
toughest part about getting someone to more level their emotion when it comes to the hours they work and being able to see things less from an operational perspective and more from a high level perspective?
I mean, I think it's just changing behavior. Like
Mhm.
it's managing transitions. And so, in order to not be trapped in your business, you have to implement systems. And sometimes implementing systems is slowing down to go faster. And there's a psychological shift that needs to take place because you can talk to someone and they can understand logistically that we need systems, and logistically we need to hire people, and logistically we need to implement standard operating procedures and checklists. But psychologically, they have to go through a letting go process. And part of those business transitions is to take into consideration the psychological journey somebody has to go on, and in addition to the structural journey the business must take.
I like that you mentioned the psychological part because I think a lot of times that's more difficult than the actual practical execution part and something that I think people should know of.
It's the limiting factor. Jim Rohn says, set out to make $1 million, not for the $1 million, but who you have to become. And that is the transition. You won't make $1 million unless you become somebody different.
Definitely. So you mentioned this a little earlier, but you end up, or alluded to this a little earlier, but you work with a lot of real estate investors. And I'm just curious, what are some of the common pain points you see that these investors have on day one?
I don't know that the work that I do, the avatar is investors and syndicators and capital raisers. However, the challenges are not unique to them. It's the same challenges that any entrepreneur is going to face. If I were to say anything that would be unique to a real estate investor or syndicator, is that they don't even realize they're building a business. They think they're just doing deals, and
Mhm.
then they realize there is a business component to it, and then that whole eye-opening experience launches their journey of building and scaling a company.
So how about this? Regardless of whoever your clients are, be it syndicators or content creators, what's the number one piece of advice you often see yourself giving them?
Hmm. We can't win if we don't execute.
Got it. And how do you get them toward the path to execution? Because I know a lot of times, as you mentioned earlier, we get analysis paralysis. So I don't think personally there's a good formula for this, but as an advisor, I'm sure there's definitely a trying or maybe a method to the madness. How do you get them to go from like analysis to more trying and kind of iterating?
Visibility is key, and I think humans, we like to understand context. Like, where are we at in the journey? Where are we at in the assembly line? Where are we at in the process? And when you can scope and sequence something out so folks can understand that you're going to be putting the puzzle together and there's a methodology and a proven way of doing it, it allows them to surrender to the process to lay that foundation that then could help them explode their growth, and they can put more emphasis on marketing and media and things that are going to expand their reach.
So is it more trying to convince an entrepreneur to look at things from more of a high level visibility standpoint as opposed to them typically being in the weeds on everything and not being able to see how the whole machine or the whole house operates?
I think visionary entrepreneurs naturally see the front of the puzzle box. They naturally are elevated and higher level. Someone who is a little bit more operationally minded tends to be a operating entrepreneur. So I think there's different types of entrepreneurs, but helping them to take their fragmented ideas and turn it into a visual piece that this is what we're building and this is what we're doing, it allows them to see in frameworks their business blueprint, kind of like real estate. You have to have a blueprint before you lay a foundation and start building the house. And the same is true in business. So we create a business blueprint before we start building. And then once we've built, then we plug in team members, just like you would plug in a property manager or tenants to run the day to day. And that's the journey that we take our entrepreneurs through, which is in essence what you're saying. But I think that it's not either or, it's all three. It's
Mhm.
just the sequence of which you do them.
So another thing that I mentioned earlier, and I want to kind of touch back and loop back on it. So a lot of times, we spoke about how an entrepreneur can be really emotionally involved, and a lot of times there could be a bit of those emotional outbursts or times when they think the world is falling apart. And I'm sure you've kind of worked with people that go through that. It's natural, nothing wrong with it. It's a natural part of the entrepreneurial cycle. So what's the best way to get someone to kind of emotionally level themselves after or kind of during an outburst like that?
Mm. Yeah, it's very common for, like you were saying earlier about passion and my comment about professional athletes. We've definitely seen a lot of professional athletes have outbursts, and you're put so much your heart and energy into something, and it can be triggering if you feel like you're dragging team members along, or there's plot twists or curveballs in different scenarios. Um, I think sometimes just settling the nervous system. So even before we hit record, I said that I like to do this reset breath work
Mhm.
before, and it takes 30 seconds. And so it's something that can help calm someone's nervous system to make their prefrontal cortex come online so they can be a better decision maker instead of in that reactive fight or flight state.
I'm just curious, what's the breathing exercise you do?
So I was trained on it from Megan Warren. She is a functional medicine and holistic performance coach. And basically, you breathe in through your lower abdomen and you hold, and then you breathe in again through your chest and you hold, and then you do an open mouth exhale and release it all. And you do that 5 or 6 times.
Got it. Okay, interesting. I'll have to try that out one day. I appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing that. So,
Mhm.
on a bit of a higher level, I'm sure you know a lot now after working with a lot of clients and working with a lot of different businesses. What's something you know now about scaling a business that you wish you knew on day one of organized to
Mm.
scale?
I think we kind of touched on it already, but I think every infinite leader has to find their eyes closed reason for doing eyes open things. Because at the end of the day, building a business, if your only pursuit is the eyes open freedoms, like I want more time freedom, I want more financial freedom, I want more geographic freedom. I've seen so many people achieve that and not have the internal freedom of joy, love, peace, connection, all of those things. And so we can't ever self sacrifice and experience that success in business and life, which your business will be more successful the more you're integrated as a leader.
Personally, I'm sure you've done a lot of reading and you might have alluded to this a bit earlier, but what's your favorite business book?
Hmm. I have several favorite books. The books, though, that were started for Organized to Scale, there's a book called Trust by Dr. Henry Cloud, which is phenomenal. I used to think of trust as an on off switch. And this book explains the anatomy of trust. And in all of my business dealings, learning to trust myself and my gut instincts has been super powerful. And then trusting my partners and my team members has been critical for success. So that book has been powerful. The other book, tactically, is Traction by Gino Wickman. If you've not read it, it's a phenomenal book. Another book, I know you asked for one, but these are all really, really good
Name
books.
name all of them. Name all of them.
Okay. And then there's another book by Gino Wickman and Mark C. Winters called Rocket Fuel. And it talks about the different types of entrepreneurs, so visionary leaders versus an integrator, and understanding your unique wiring so you can sit in your lane and own that seat. And then there's another great book called Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And it's basically an envelope system for financial and cash management for businesses. And it really helps to make sure that as revenue is coming in, that you're allocating it accordingly so you're not behind the eight ball in cash, which you alluded to also earlier, was if people run out of money. So those are some really solid books that have helped shape me as a leader and also our systems internally.
Thanks so much for sharing some of those recommendations, and I might have to add some of them to my list.
Yes.
On a bit of a parting note here, so a hot topic these days is AI, and I like to end my show kind of talking about looking towards the future. And I'm sure you probably hear about AI on the news and every single day. It's the next big thing, quote unquote. How can a business owner use AI to streamline their scaling efforts?
We use AI and automations all the time. I think humans that use AI are going to win more. And we use AI for transcription, for thought ideas, for editing videos, for coming up with hooks and taglines. AI is just a powerful tool already, and it's only getting better.
Got it. Awesome to hear, and great that you get a chance to use AI, and something I definitely use. And I think that a lot of people, unfortunately, are scared about it. But I think that if you can learn to enhance your output and your work experience with AI, you're here to stay for the future. But Staci, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing all that really interesting knowledge. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Staci Gray. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.